Hello, everyone. Welcome to our online No to Nato, Yes to Peace online protest webinar for June. Since we can't be on the streets, we take to the internet and attract more people from across Canada and today the United States, as we have some special guests, to establish a movement we can take back to even more streets. My co-host Tamara Lorincz will have more information on that soon, as to why VOW opposes NATO and the fighter jets campaign. I want to welcome our amazing featured guest today, Ann Wright, who is with Code Pink and many other organizations. Also, I want to welcome our special accompanying guest, Kawena Kapahua, who is a native to Hawaii and working on dismantling their military. We are here today to talk about the Rimpac practices on the shores of Hawaii. Now, unfortunately, my video cut out at the beginning of the Zoom meeting. So I would have been next inviting Melissa Weale, the VOW National Coordinator, to speak about some of our doings. If you want to find any of those, please go to vowpeace.org, and all of our advocacy work is there. So I'm going to continue now into where we left off with Ann Wright's presentation. Please enjoy. Thank you.
Canadians that are in Latvia, which is a part of the NATO buildup in the Baltic countries right along the Russian border. So that's a very good reason why you all have, for good reason, joined No to NATO. But now going to the Pacific, out where we are in Hawaii right now, Kawena and I, it's 9:45 in the morning for us, but Rimpac is the largest naval military war maneuvers practices in the world. It began in 1971, and Canada was one of the three countries that started it out with the United States and Australia. This is the 27th time Rimpac has happened. In 2018, there were 25 nations, 45 surface ships, 5 submarines, 17 countries sent land forces, and more than 200 aircraft and 25,000 military personnel from around the world were a part of that. Some of the countries, they keep trying to get new countries, and in 2018, for the first time, Vietnam, Israel, and Sri Lanka participated. Israel is not participating this year because of COVID, another good thing. In times past, China had been invited to participate, but in 2018, it was disinvited because of the militarization of the man-made islands in the Spratly Island chain. But China and Russia always do send surveillance vessels to monitor this massive exercise from a distance. And then who all is a part of it? Well, when read the 25 nations, I mean, it's huge. Let's see, Australia, Brunei, Canada, Chile, Colombia, France, Germany, India, Indonesia, Israel, Japan, Malaysia, Mexico, the Netherlands, New Zealand, Peru, South Korea, the Philippines, Singapore, Sri Lanka, Thailand, Tonga, the United Kingdom, the United States, and Vietnam. So normally, in 2018, Canada sent more than 1,000 personnel, 5 ships, and a patrol aircraft. This year, one website says that you all in Canada are going to be sending 4 ships, a destroyer, a frigate, a submarine, and a littoral, which is a kind of a coastline vessel. That you'll also be sending a diving unit and an infantry company, but probably the infantry company is not coming because land exercises, which were also a part, amphibious landing exercises on the shores of Hawaii, have been canceled due to the COVID. The Rimpac was originally scheduled to begin now in the middle of June and go through all the way through August. But because of COVID, it has been shortened to August 17th to the end of August. Thank goodness. And supposedly, there are no people from the ships are to come into Hawaii. You know, we have a quarantine here in Hawaii. Any person coming into Hawaii has to go into quarantine in your home for 14 days. And in fact, this is the 14th day of my quarantine. So later on this afternoon, after 2 p.m., that'll be 14 days, and I'm free. I can go out and with mask and everything, I can at least get out of my apartment. But the U.S. military is now exempt from the quarantine. So in the last 2 weeks, every week we've been having over 1,100 U.S. military arriving in Honolulu, and now the exemption, you know, the U.S. military gets away with everything, it seems like. The exemption is for a quarantine is now being given to military families. So this is something that we're very, very concerned about. But still, the state of Hawaii says it does not want any of the people on the ships that will be coming here to come. However, each one of the national elements is going to be able to have a shore command and control element, which will probably be anywhere from 15 to 20 people. So that means that probably around 600 people from other nations will be coming in on the shores of Hawaii to be part of the command and control elements of this whole exercise. And that's something that we, of course, are very, very concerned about. That's kind of the overview of what Rimpac is. We do have a film that we would like to show you to give you a sense of what this is all about. It's not just little ships bobbing around out in the ocean. These ships are firing big artillery, or not artillery, but ship-to-shore artillery, I guess, but it didn't hit the shore, thank God. But they're dropping bombs from aircraft. They're shooting up. They're sinking ships, practicing sinking ships. All of this that you will see would be very harmful for marine life and animal life in our oceans. So if we could see if we can get that video going, and I'll do a little narration of it to kind of set the scene about why it is so important that we work together to cancel Rimpac.
Yes. Okay. There we go. The shorter one, right? And then what time should I put it to?
Let's put it for about 5 minutes. Okay. This first, or go back to the beginning, and then we'll run it for 3 or 4 minutes. And several films have been made about Rimpac, and this is just one of several. We'll send you some links. Here's some of the amphibious work where the amphibious things go onshore. And here are the helicopters, and that would, on the shore part of it, be bringing people from the ships onto the shore. This is a view of Pearl Harbor, the massive harbor that we have here in Honolulu, where the ships are anchored sometimes when they come into port. At the end of it, they always have a big brouhaha here in Honolulu, which I think Kawena will talk more about. Here will be some of the firing that's going on from the ships, just shooting out at, sometimes there's a target, sometimes not. And some more. Here's one of the ships they sank in 2018. And if you can imagine, and this is another ship, picture of Pearl Harbor with the ships lined up side by side by side by side as they brought them in at the end of the exercise. Here's dropping a bomb from, or a torpedo. Here's some of the wildlife that can be injured by the massive booming. Here's some of the jets that are on the big ships that are part of it. And now I think next we're going to show you some of the onshore going into Pearl Harbor and some of the protests that we had in 2018. We have 5 major military bases here on one island of Oahu. We have an Air Force base, a Marine base, an Army base, a Coast Guard base, and the Navy base, the giant Navy base. And here's some of the actions. And you know, this coming weekend we'll have a day of action that's actually sponsored out of New Zealand. And if we can get people all over the world to show your concern about this Rimpac, would really be helpful. But we do have a very spirited group of activists that each time Rimpac comes, we have demonstrations out in front of the entrance to the naval base. And some very spirited speaking about militarization of not only the Hawaiian Islands, but of all of the Pacific. And of course, we're always met, as everyone, with police and law enforcement. And here's some of our folks that are speaking about trying to stop Rimpac. This coming up in the next week or so, we're going to be having a visit from our U.S. Secretary of State, Pompeo, here in Honolulu. He's coming to supposedly meet with Chinese government officials on a variety of things, I would imagine. But this whole issue of the U.S. Having a huge number of Navy vessels that are right now in the South China Sea. All 4 of the attack submarines that are located in Guam, a territory of the United States, an occupied territory as Hawaii is, have been sent. We have 3 aircraft carriers that are in the Pacific now, 2 in the Western Pacific. So the issue of the U.S. pivot to Asia and the Pacific is there, and a very dangerous one. Plus the U.S. COVID, the allegations that from the U.S. that China unleashed COVID on the world, all of this plus trade policies have really brought us to a very dangerous point in world affairs, and particularly for Asia and the Pacific. I think we can probably stop here, and the rest of this particular film is more of the people who in 2018 have protested Rimpac and will continue to protest Rimpac as we get closer to the actual time. So again, we thank you all so very, very much for hosting this and adding Rimpac and the naval war practices in the Pacific to your list of concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So next I will welcome Kawena, who is a native Hawaiian activist based in Hawaii, working to protect Hawaiian land and human rights on the Manakia, as well as in the plethora of other Hawaiian issues. He is a co-organizer of the Cancel Rimpac Coalition in Hawaii that has been working to end the Rimpac War Games and is also pushing for the demilitarization of Hawaii in order to further the welfare of the people of Hawaii, its land, and the waters. So I welcome Kawena. Thank you. Kawena.
Aloha makako. Mahalo for having me again. As she said, my name is Kawena Kapahua. I'm one of the Native Hawaiian organizers for the Cancel Rimpac Coalition. And so basically, I'll kind of try to go over a lot of the local impact of what Rimpac does here in Hawaii. So as Ann mentioned, the Pacific in general is one of the most militarized regions in the entire world, and Rimpac is kind of the precipice of that. You're bringing in thousands of military units into Hawaii, which is already an extremely militarized area. As she mentioned, on the island of Oahu alone, there's 5 military bases. I, in fact, live near the Marine Corps base. I actually live under one of the military flight paths. So if you can't hear me for a minute, it's probably the helicopters flying over. It's actually kind of getting near that time of day. But yeah, Rimpac really has a very adverse effect here in Hawaii, especially, and it's been exacerbated by the pandemic. Hawaii's main economic drivers are tourism and the military, which have been, obviously very limited during this time of crisis. Currently, we have a unemployment rate of about 37%. So we've really seen a lot of adverse effects from this the current pandemic crisis. And the military is being, especially Rimpac, is being touted as kind of an economic restart for us, despite all of its really adverse effects. Due to the fact that it's bringing in so many people, the idea is that it'll bring in a lot of money and that will benefit from it. But basically, Rimpac has been going on since around 1971. And like Ann mentioned, Canada was one of the first nations that took part in it, and along with several other American aligned nations. And when it got its start, one of the things that was going on at the same time was the Hawaiian Renaissance. And this was jump-started by the Protect Ko'olave Ohana. So Ko'olave is an island it's in the Hawaiian island chain. It's just off of Maui and Lanai. And it was seized by the U.S. military in World War II to be used as a bombing target. And so during the night, from the 1970s through 1990s, the military was actually bombing it as a target, and they bombed it so hard they broke the island's water table, so it no longer harbors fresh water. And during this, Rimpac used it as a target multiple times. And in fact, so one of the Protect Ko'olave Ohana's goals was to get, obviously, the militaries to stop bombing it. Eventually, they were able to get several countries to withdraw, including Japan, Great Britain, and Australia. However, America and Canada and several others continued to bomb it despite these protests. But eventually, the island was given back to the Hawaiian people, which is great. Unfortunately, for years there's been a lot of work to try and restore this island. It's still ongoing to this day. And then in addition to this, a lot of the local impact of Rimpac relates to just the amount of people it brings in. So obviously during a pandemic, that the mass influx of people is very concerning. But even though they've said it's going to be a mostly at-sea exercise, there's a lot of concern, like Ann said, of them bringing in logistical support teams to be on the ground. That's a huge amount. And then also we're currently going through kind of a reopening phase here. So the inter-island quarantine was just lifted last Friday, meaning that anyone flying in within the Hawaiian Islands that no longer has to quarantine. The people coming from outside Hawaii still have to, but we're not sure how long that'll stay in effect. And it's very possible that the military can renege on these commitments in terms of, keeping things at sea only or any of those kind of things. It's very easy for them to withdraw those commitments. And so those are major concerns of ours. In addition to this, Rimpac has it's a lot of funds. It's taking up a lot of funds that could be used for humanitarian means at this moment. Like I said, there's 37% unemployment here in Hawaii. Food lines often go for hours. There's a lot of economic burden that's being placed on the people. And with that, a lot of people are being told to stay home to help stop the spread. So the influx of military personnel to Hawaii would be very concerning and very unfair to the people here, because Hawaii has luckily done as good a job as it could in terms of containing the virus. Unfortunately, currently we're going through another spike. We just had we reached double-digit daily cases once again. We haven't had that for about a month now. So as we're seeing this reopening spike, we're just about to go. We're going to be welcoming Rimpac here, which, well, not really welcoming, but Rimpac will be coming here, which could definitely exacerbate the pandemic crisis here in Hawaii. One of the major concerns as well is, we've seen with Guam, some of the examples around the Pacific, that the U.S. military is not containing this crisis as well as they would like to have everyone believe. While Hawaii has contained it for the most part, the military is not reporting cases at the local level due to them deeming it a threat to national security if they release their numbers. So despite us understanding what the numbers of coronavirus cases look like here in Hawaii locally, we don't actually know what it looks like in the military population here. So there's been reports that it's much worse, but we're really not sure because the military is not reporting at the local level. In addition to this, we've seen with Guam and the USS Roosevelt that the Navy in particular has had a major issue with containing this pandemic. The USS Roosevelt's the aircraft carrier that was stationed in Guam that had a major outbreak that ended up having to quarantine many of its sailors. And so, there's this idea that, if we keep the exercise of Rimpac only at sea, we won't be putting people at risk. But in fact, it definitely will be putting the sailors at risk due to the close living conditions of ships. It's very likely to see an outbreak. And if there is such an outbreak during the Rimpac Games, they will almost most certainly be bringing those sailors or whoever is infected here to Hawaii onshore to our medical facilities, which again exposes the rest of us to that risk. And so, that's one of the major reasons why we're opposing it this year. Obviously, we would like to stop it indefinitely, permanently, but that's a major focus of the 2020 effort to cancel Rimpac. In addition to this, there's the UN has called for a global ceasefire during this pandemic, and yet we're holding a military war games practice, which it's just a gross misappropriation of resources. And so, and then in addition to this, there's a lot of impact it has, not just on in an economic sense or the pandemic sense. It has a lot of these impacts whenever it comes. One of the things that continuously happens is, when the Rimpac comes here, it brings a lot of military, and unfortunately, one of the things that's linked to that is sex trafficking really goes up. It climbs to exponential levels. So that's an extreme concern, especially this year. Even though a lot of the sailors are going to be kept at sea, there's still the logistical support teams that come. And every year with Rimpac, sex trafficking goes through the roof, and it's an extreme major concern. And so if this exercise goes through this year, it's likely to continue that trend. In addition to that, we're also looking at some of the impact it has on our environment. Like Ann said, they do a lot of ship-to-shore artillery trainings, as well as sinking ships at sea, which is called Ship X. Currently, one of the common areas they use to bomb is called Pohakuloa, which is on the Big Island of Hawaii. One of my main issues is the protection of Mauna Kea from desecration through the building of the 30-meter telescope. Pohakuloa is also located on Mauna Kea. It's in the center of Hawaii Island, which is the same island as Kilauea, which is the active volcano. And it's a large center area in the middle of the island. It's a very sacred Hawaiian place. There's a lot of ancient temples that are there. And it's used as a military bombing ground. When we were in this past year, when we were up on Mauna Kea, blocking the access road to protect the mountain from construction machines going up to build this telescope, they were literally bombing. I think it's maybe 5 miles down the road from where we were. So in the middle of the night, we could feel like the artillery going off, the pound and the shaking of the earth, and it's they do that all the time. But during Rimpac, it's extremely exacerbated with the amount of ordnance that they bring in. With the on-land exercises being canceled for this year, it's not likely that they will, but it's also it's possible they reopen that. But it's extremely damaging to the environment of what they do. Also, underneath Mauna Kea is a major aquifer for the island of Hawaii, and so that kind of toxic pollution is extremely damaging for the environment, and it could be very damaging for the people there. There's also been reports of the U.S. military has also used it, for a lot of other military exercises as well. In addition to this, in 2018, when Rimpac came, it actually ignited a bushfire in Pohakuloa that burned over 2,000 acres of land. And it's just the environmental impact is extremely adverse. And in addition to this, on the island of Oahu, they do a lot of the coastline landings, the amphibious assault trainings. One of the areas they use is called Waimanalo, which is it's basically a Hawaiian community. The military has an Air Force training site near this community. They've taken over a large part of the beach area, and currently it's I think it was this week. They actually, for the first time in recorded history, they basically hundreds of endangered sea turtles, made their nesting site on this beach that is regularly used to practice military landings. And it's the first time it's ever happened in recorded history. And so it's an incredible thing to see. It's great for the wildlife to be coming back. It's very likely that they used this before, but due to a lot of the human activity in the area, they stayed away from this particular nesting ground. So them coming back is extremely positive. And if we go through with Rimpac, that whole nesting ground is going to be put at risk. In addition to that, there's, as you can see in the video, there's a lot of those at sea munitions exercises. So they sink ships really regularly. It depends on how many per year they do. It's usually at least 2. But basically, they just shoot at these ships until they sink them. And essentially, the U.S. military itself has pointed out before that this releases a lot of toxic pollutants into the water. They don't do this very far offshore, to be honest. And so, you know, we live surrounded by water. Ocean currents are flowing toward the land, toward these islands. So eventually, these toxic pollutants end up in our waters and end up near our people. And so it's extremely concerning that kind of disregard the military has for public safety and environmental protections. One of the other things that has been recorded over the history of Rimpac is the U.S. Navy, despite them not necessarily being liable to be sued for damages due to their environmental impact or public safety impact, they acknowledge that they have an adverse effect on the environment. In the U.S. Navy's own environmental impact statement in previous years, Rimpac has exposed over 250,000 whales to hearing loss from sonar, which extremely risks the survival of these animals because of those injuries. And they list the range of the damage for being from like much traumatic stress in the moment to death. And so that's extremely concerning considering how vital these animals are to the ecosystem here in Hawaii. And a lot of the ships that they end up sinking or these sonar exercises take place just 55 kilometers offshore. So it's really not that far. And it's a very, the impacts can very much be felt here on land, especially with, you know, if whales wash up or if there's a large die-off of marine mammals or animals in general. Yeah, and so considering all of these impacts, it's hard to not try and cancel this. And so there's been a lot of efforts over the years from the Protect Ho'olawe Ohana, the Nuclear Free and Independent Pacific Organization, have all mobilized to try and stop this before. Unfortunately, the military is very committed to this position. So that, you know, this is a very long running struggle, several decades at least. In addition to the UN calling for a global ceasefire, a lot of US legislators have signed a letter to the House Armed Services Committee urging a reduction in defense spending. You know, the US has the largest defense budget in the entire world, and though a lot of that money would be better spent at this very moment for humanitarian means. I mean, the US, it's suffering itself. It's seeing another spike currently. I mean, there's been news story after news story about the lack of PPE that the US has had. And so, you know, there's a lot of better uses that we could be using for this money for, instead of one, destroying Hawaiian land, and then also just blowing things up and not helping people. In addition to a lot of the impacts that Rimpac has on the environment, I mentioned Pohakuloa earlier. This is actually a bullet that was found this past year at one of the Hawaiian temples. So there's a time of the year called Makahiki. It's basically the beginning of, it's basically Hawaiian New Year. And so we went to some of the heiau in near the military bombing range to perform ceremony and these kind of things. And we found these are just one of the many bullets they found in the temple. And so the impacts are very real. I mean, that's about as real as it gets in terms of the munitions impact here in Hawaii. In other years, when there's not a pandemic, the military enjoys a lot of liberty options. Basically, they allow their guys to just go wherever they want on island. And that's kind of the incentive for the economic driver of Rimpac. But it also displaces a lot of people. You know, Hawaii, we already see at our peak tourism season about 30,000 people a day. Rimpac brings in about 25,000 personnel on a normal year. So that's almost as much as we see during peak times. So it creates a lot of it creates a lot of overcrowding here on the island, especially due to Oahu seeing the most of those, just because of the majority of the military bases being here. One of the things you saw in that video was Pu'uloa, or Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor used to be one of the breadbaskets here of Hawaii. It used to have many fish ponds or aqua farming kind of areas in it, and it no longer houses those due to the pollution from the military base. You know, just a few years ago, the UH found that the U.S. military had been burying chemical weapons near that base. There's also a lot of pollution from those ships, and so a lot of the fishing resources that we used to have from these areas of the military now uses during Rimpac especially, are no longer viable to us. And so, you know, the impact of Rimpac is very much felt by the community. And so it's extremely important that we cancel it, not only this year, but every year following, in order to reallocate those resources to better use for the community and also to help protect and sustain our natural resources here in Hawaii, so that we no longer need to suffer the damages that are being caused so much by extreme militarism here. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, everyone. That was inspiring. That was really inspiring. A lot of on the ground stuff going on to really know. That was really good. So I'm just kind of overwhelmed. I was like, oh my God, we just showed the bullet. So, but okay, next I'm going to welcome Greer Donaldson, our student volunteer who's been working hard on our petitions, and welcome to share our actions that we're doing right now. So welcome, Greer. There we go.
All right. Hi, everyone. So I'm just going to talk about the Rimpac campaign that we're launching as of today. So we're calling for Canada to end their participation in Rimpac for this year as our goal for now. We're launching the campaign right now while we're doing this. So I'll send out the link for our letter campaign. We're sending the letter. Each time everyone signs and sends a letter, it sends to the Prime Minister, the Defense Minister, Minister of Fisheries, Oceans and Coast Guard, and the Minister of Finance. So, and within that, we've outlined briefly all of the reasons that we just heard about of why Rimpac should be canceled altogether. So we're calling on Canada to pull out because of COVID concerns, environmental concerns, the spending and resources going into the military industrial complex, and putting that back towards Canadians. So we do have the letter campaign. If you do want to go sign, which we'd really appreciate to get us started and show your support, so that when we share it on social media, we have a good base to go off of. Just make sure that you edit the letter so that we make sure all of them get through to our targets. Sometimes if we leave it, they'll be filtered out if there's too many that are similar. So feel free to put in your opinions and anything else you want to add to it. We just briefly touch on all the points that have already been discussed. So this campaign is part of our bigger goal against demilitarization and taking money away from the military industrial complex and weapons, putting them back towards programs and services for Canadians, including our environmental offices and lots of other very underfunded services compared to our military, which only keeps going up. And we're also going to be sharing some resources with you. We'll link to our webpage for it as well. And if you want to follow us on social media so that you can keep updated, we're going to keep covering our Rimpac campaign. Even during Rimpac, if Canada decides to still participate for this year, we're going to cover everything that we can see that comes up to keep on top of it. And we're also going to, hopefully in the near future, be sharing some more campaigns that have to do with military spending in Canada. And I know Tamara is going to talk more about the warships just after me. So that's another campaign that we're hoping to work on and release soon. So keep an eye out on that, and please share our campaign with everyone so that we have a good ground base. Thank you.
Great. Wow. Wonderful. If I could just mention, you know, we thank you all so much for having these letters going to your key government officials. In New Zealand, they sent a letter. A lot of people and academics and activist groups sent one to their government, and it really got a lot of publicity. So far, New Zealand's still in Rimpac, but it certainly has stirred up the pot. So thank you all so much.
Good. Hopefully with their Prime Minister woman, I love her. Hopefully she comes around and gets out of it. Yeah, she's doing everything else right. She's got to do that one now. So yeah, I just want to read one comment here that I really liked. War exercises during a global pandemic are crime against humanity, period. From Tony Seed. I really like that, so I wanted to read that aloud before now we go over to Tamara to bring it back to our main topic and connect it with NATO. So welcome, Tamara.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much to Ann and to Kawena for their amazing presentations. We're totally standing in solidarity with you, and we're going to work hard to try to stop Canada's participation in Rimpac. And thank you, Greer, for mentioning the petition that we're going to have against Canada's participation in Rimpac, and also a petition that's going to be coming to stop Canada from building new warships. And so that's what I'm going to talk to you about for just a few minutes this afternoon. And I'm going to show you some slides. So I'm just going to try to share that now. Okay, so so I am based right now in Waterloo, Ontario, but I have lived on both coasts of Canada. So for 14 years, I lived in Halifax, one of the most militarized cities in Canada, and I protested Canada's Atlantic Fleet there. And I also lived for 9 years in Victoria, and I protested Canada's Pacific Fleet at its Esquimalt dockyard. So in the few minutes that I have, I'm going to tell you about Canada's largest and most expensive federal procurement program in the history of this country. And that is the building of Canada's new warships. And then I'm going to say something about the Canadian Voice of Women's opposition to NATO, and I'm going to close with some upcoming events and resources. So in June of 2010, the Harper Conservative government announced the National Shipbuilding Procurement Strategy as a plan to replace the ships of the Royal Canadian Navy and the Coast Guard. So there are three components. There were three components of this plan. The first one is the combat package to build 6 armed Arctic offshore patrol ships and 15 Canadian surface combatants. The initial cost was about $25 billion. The second component is the non-combat package, and this is to build the joint supply ships for the Navy, and this was valued at about $8 billion. And then the third component is the smaller vessel package to build other ships and to do some repair work. Now, of all of these ships that are going to be built, only 4 are scientific vessels. The rest are mostly warships. Now, the federal government announced the National Shipbuilding Procurement Strategy because they said they needed to rebuild Canada's suffering shipbuilding industry, and also to provide good jobs for Canadians. In October of 2011, the federal government announced that the Irving Shipyard in Halifax won the lucrative combat package. And the whole province was so happy about this, and I was really upset, and I started a year-long protest. I protested every single Wednesday against the announcement of the building of these new warships. Now, over the past 9 years, the only thing that the Irving Shipyard has built to this point is 1 armed Arctic offshore patrol. Another one is supposed to come out this year, but the Irving Shipyard has not yet started building the surface combatants. So last February, the federal government confirmed that Lockheed Martin won the design for these new surface combatants for the Canadian Navy. And these surface combatants are going to be using BAE Type 26 Global Combat Ship. Now, BAE is a British weapons manufacturer. It's one of the largest weapons manufacturers in the world, and it's also one of the most corrupt. And this is the design that we're going to be using for Canada's warships. 6 months after that announcement, Canada's independent parliamentary budget officer estimated that the combat package to build these new surface combatants is going to increase to $70 billion over its life cycle. This is 3 times higher than what was originally planned. And most of this money is going to leave Canada because the only thing that the Irving shipyard can build is the hull and the frame. The most lucrative technical parts of the ship, the navigation system and the weapon system, he expects will be built in the United States by Lockheed Martin. So most of these great jobs are going to be in the United States. Now, there are many instances of the Canadian Navy having terrible environmental damage. So this is the headlines in the news from 2018. There was a massive oil spill off the coast of Vancouver Island, and this is where our endangered killer whales are. There was also a substantial oil spill in the Halifax Harbor when I was living there by a naval vessel in 2012. And my friend who has served in the Navy has said that in the past, the Canadian Navy routinely dumped waste and oil at sea. There's also, as you heard from Ann and Kawena, there's munitions debris from naval exercises, both unexploded and unexploded ordnances in our oceans. There's also now definitive research that shows that there are direct impacts of the Navy's sonar on the death of whales and dolphins. So high frequency radar that the Navy uses destroys marine life's hearing and their ability to navigate. So Canada is building new warships that have these high frequency sonars. We're putting them on our acidifying and dying oceans. This is terrible. I mean, we absolutely have to stop this. We instead need to be investing in cleaning up and caring for our oceans. The environmental groups in the country, have been calling for something called a blue recovery. That's what we need. We need a blue recovery for our oceans. We don't need new warships. Now, this webinar today is part of VOW's No to NATO, Yes to Peace series. So the Canadian Voice of Women is totally opposed to NATO. About a year and a half ago, we launched a campaign called Feminists Against Militarism, Women Say No to NATO. These are our banners. We need more banners printed in this country. So if you are able to make a financial donation to VOW to help us get a banner for Halifax so we can use this banner during the Halifax International Security Forum in November, we would be very grateful. They cost about $150, but we need more banners and we need them in Victoria as well, outside of the Esquimalt base. So why is VOW opposed to NATO? Well, there are many reasons. It's an exclusive military alliance of only 30 member countries. It relies on a dangerous nuclear deterrence. Most of the world is not part of NATO. NATO's been involved in illegal military interventions all over the place, and NATO's putting intense pressure on our country to increase military spending to 2% of GDP by 2024. Right now, we're at 1.3% of GDP, and our military spending is through the roof. So we cannot reach this 2% target. We have to stop it. So VOW believes that NATO cannot be reformed. It must be abolished, and Canada needs to get out of NATO. And we would really love your help to amplify our message and to support our campaign. Now, I'd like to just talk very quickly about Canada's Navy participating in NATO operations in Europe. So for the past 6 years, Canada's Navy has been patrolling and conducting NATO war exercises in the Mediterranean and in the Black Sea, right on Russia's coast. This long, protracted military operation is called Operation Reassurance. And you can see there, just a couple of months ago, on April 29th, 6 naval personnel died in a Cyclone helicopter crash just off the coast of Greece. Now, they were deployed with a Canadian warship, the HMCS Fredericton, and the HMCS Fredericton is part of NATO's Standing Maritime Group. So I just want to show you quickly a map of a map of Europe and the area where the Black Sea is. I mean, look, this is right. The Black Sea is bordered by 6 countries, the Ukraine, Romania, Bulgaria, Turkey, Georgia, and Russia. You know, we are exercising right on Russia's border. This is so provocative. This is like Russia, you know, conducting naval exercises in the Hudson Bay off the coast of Manitoba. It's totally ridiculous. And the Black Sea is dying from the tremendous anthropogenic strain on it, and primarily from these war exercises. The Black Sea is heavily polluted, and some scientists fear that it is going to become a dead zone very soon. So NATO causes a lot of marine damage. NATO is not necessary as well. It's not necessary for our security. We have the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Canada ratified this in 2003, and it provides a legal framework for all countries to solve any type of conflict in the marine environment peacefully. So we don't need NATO. And then I just want to tell you a terrible development that took place last week. This last Monday, June 8th, the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg made a big announcement. It's a new campaign called NATO 2030. It is an agenda it is a military and political project to expand NATO. This is terrible. And folks, I am telling you that if NATO exists till 2030, it will be impossible for the international community to meet the Paris Agreement targets, to prevent catastrophic climate change by 2030, and it will prevent the international community from meeting the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So we need your help to say no to NATO. We cannot have NATO 2030. And then finally, I would like to invite you to a webinar that's being hosted by the international network called No to NATO, Yes to Peace. I'm a member of that. It's next Thursday, June 25th. You can follow it, the live stream on YouTube, and you can also sign up for the webinar through the Facebook event. It's right there. And then I also want to bring to your attention and ask you to mark your calendar for this fantastic peace conference and major protests that we're having next June 2021 in Ottawa. We are going to shut down CANSEC, the biggest arms show in North America, and then we're going to have a fantastic peace conference. So I want all of you to come. Please spread the word. We need a massive mobilization there. And then finally, there's some resources that I'd like to share with you that's critical to NATO. I'm happy to send you my slides, and we will be sure to send out this recording and the slides in a follow-up email to you. So thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you. So we'll go into question and answer time now. We had one question in the chat. I will read that and we can get started with that one, I guess. So are depleted uranium munitions used in these bombing exercises? So from Linda. So any of our...
Kawena, you want to take that one?
Sure. Yeah, so there has been reports of depleted uranium being used at Pohakuloa. In fact, that was a major point. There was actually just a lawsuit that was brought against the state of Hawaii, or the American government in Hawaii, basically about the military's misuse of these lands. That was something that was revealed years ago. Basically, these depleted rounds were being used in some of the mechanized combat vehicles that were exercising in Pohakuloa, and so that was a major point of the lawsuit. That was actually just won last year by the plaintiffs. Or those who brought it against the state, basically saying that the state had not held the military to its agreement to protect that land and to also ensure the safety of the people who live in that area. But yeah, so short answer, yes.
And if I could just add to it, you know, the military uses elements of depleted uranium to make shells because it makes the shells denser. You can pack more explosive power into these things that have the depleted uranium, and that was one of the allegations against the U.S. in Iraq War I, that the U.S. used so much of this munitions in blowing up trucks that were trying to get back up into Iraq, that the whole southern part of Iraq was polluted with depleted uranium. And also, when the Marines went into Fallujah in this last Iraq war, the level of munitions that were used there that have depleted uranium with them is another thing that the U.S. should be held responsible for. Thank you.
Yeah, they have not cleaned up any of the depleted uranium rounds here in Hawaii either. So a lot of those are still lying around on this firing range. And every time they fire, a lot more of those pollutants get kicked up into the air and carried into nearby residential areas.
And if I could just mention one other thing, when Rimpac happens here at the middle part of August, not only will we have demonstrations that are on the shore, but we are going to have a demonstration in the ocean itself. I'm a member of Veterans for Peace, and we have in fact, I'll see if I can share it, a picture of, let's see, can you let me share the screen for a minute? And I'll see if I can bring up a picture of the Golden Rule, which is a historic sailing ship that in 1958 came to Hawaii on its way to the Marshall Islands to try to sail to the Marshalls to stop atmospheric nuclear testing back in 1958. Well, the U.S. Coast Guard stopped it, and it, after 3 attempts, it was unable to get to the Marshall Islands. Well, here it is 60 years later. Veterans for Peace has renovated the Golden Rule, and it has sailed to Hawaii and is here. And we plan to have the Golden Rule on the waters with big banners on it saying, "Can't stop Rimpac." So we'll send you some great photos when that happens. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that sounds exciting. Get out there. I love that stuff. There we go, back up here. Tony asked, he missed the beginning with Ann. What is the political objective served by Rimpac? I know North Korea has vigorously opposed it over the years, and Pompeo is organizing an anti-China coalition. Well,
yeah, China when China was a part of Rimpac, which was only for 3 or 4 years, there wasn't that much opposition coming out of the Chinese, but certainly when it was disinvited because of the US and the world being very concerned about the militarization of the Spratly Islands and the numbers of islands, artificial islands that the Chinese have built and put military bases on. That is now why, that started the Obama administration pivot to Asia and the Pacific. And under the Trump administration, even though, Trump has in some ways reached out to North Korea, the US North Korean challenges are very large. And with now the North Koreans having broken off essentially communication with South Korea over their allegations that the South Koreans nor the US have fulfilled any part of any type of reconciliation efforts, plus the fact that the Chinese are very concerned about the numbers of US warships that are in the South China Sea. As I mentioned before, there are 4 attack submarines that left Guam in May. There are 3 other attack submarines from the west coast of the United States that are there. There are 2 aircraft carrier and naval forces that are associated. Each aircraft carrier will probably have 10 other ships that are associated with it that are all from Guam to the Philippines into the South China Sea. So it is a very dangerous situation right now that's going on. And I think the fact that Pompeo, the Secretary of State of the US, is flying out to Hawaii within probably a week to apparently have discussions with Chinese. And of course, we're trying to find out where that will be so we can have our little banners out there too. It may be at the East-West Center, which would be certainly easiest for us to get to. Because I doubt that they will want the Chinese government officials on a US military base. So we may have an extraordinary opportunity here if it's held at the East-West Center, which is at the University of Hawaii campus, Manoa. So, it is a dangerous time. The US has certainly escalated its military work in the Western Pacific. And one other interesting point, less than a year ago, the US had over 100 US military that were in China. They were in China because they were part of the International War Games, sports games that were being held in, guess where? Wuhan, China, in October of last year. Well, I can guarantee you that there probably aren't going to be any more US military on Chinese soil for quite a long period of time. But anyway, it's a dangerous situation, and it's important that we as Citizens for Peace are talking about these things right now. Thank you.
I'll also add to the political objective of Rimpac. One of the other things to remember about this is all of these being conducted in Hawaiian waters and on Hawaiian land, which is, it's an occupied territory of the United States. Hawaii never voted to become part of America. It was militarily seized. And then in addition to this, some of the member countries that take part in the Rimpac exercise don't have the best human rights records. One very recent example of this is Indonesia. They're currently committing genocide in West Papua against the West Papuans who have been vying for their independence for a long time. Since they broke free of European colonialism, West Papua was independent for about a year, and then West Indonesia invaded and took over, and has since been suppressing these people. And one of the issues with West Papua is the Indonesian military is acting very aggressively toward the West Papuans, and then also denying access of foreign journalists to report on the situation. So there's very little news coming out of there. But the Rimpac exercises are being used a lot of the time by some of these authoritarian or repressive regimes to practice oppressing their own populations, to practice their war maneuvers for these kind of things. So it's very concerning that one of the political objectives of this is not only for the U.S. to flex its muscles at China and to hold a huge weapons or arms sale, arms convention, but also to help other countries practice their own war capabilities in terms of suppressing their own people. And that's all being done on an active occupation here in Hawaii as well.
And if I could just add a couple more things to that, we just should add the country of Israel and its horrific policies toward Palestinians, and also the country of Turkey participated as an observer in 2018, therefore is invited, and we haven't heard that it has declined an invitation to come to Rimpac, and what it has done to the Kurds in Turkey and what it's doing in Syria right now are very, very concerning. So it's not like this is a group of, none of our nations, in our nation's deliberate disintegration of native populations in all of our countries, whether it be the United States and what we've done to Hawaii, what we've done to our Native Americans on the mainland, what has happened in Canada, what's happened in Australia, New Zealand. I mean, all of these colonial countries that are part of Rimpac are guilty as can be of horrific crimes against their own peoples and others. Thank you.
Thank you. Another question here that I'm going to try and tie into another comment too that I like. So how do we connect the dehumanization we are experiencing in militarizing policing and weaponizing ideas of protection? So we'll do that first, and then my next question is after that is, what are some actions we can take from this too? A lot of people are asking like what tactics and strategies can we imagine beyond signs and letters? And then I like Tamara's, when is your protest or next protest, you're the big one, and when, and that we should plan one around the same time so we can all do it around the same time. I'd love that. I was like, yes. So yeah, if you want to start on the militarized policing and the dehumanization, talk about that. Yeah, thank you.
Well, I'll start it out. I mean, you can certainly see that people hitting the streets is having a major impact in the United States. It's not as big as we want yet, but what is happening is solely because hundreds of thousands of people have hit the streets that have been there visibly to show the rest of the country and the world that things have to change, and then flooding into city council meetings and using community power to force chiefs of police, mayors, city councils to recognize that there has to be a change, and keeping out on the streets until that change happens. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll speak a little bit to the militarized police as well. A lot of one of the major things in America is there's a program that allows local police and county police to receive arms from the U.S. military that are outdated or in excess. And so a lot of the weapons that are used during Rimpac or things like that, I mean, we've just seen very recently tanks used by American police forces against the Black Lives Matter protests. And so, this extreme militarism that we see over and over and over again in our world plays a huge part into the way populations are controlled and how policing is done. It's a lot of it is just using fear tactics and intimidation, and there's a lot that goes into building this mindset of like the superiority of the military and all that stuff, and that really filters down into the police force when it comes down to the uniform and the weapons and all that kind of stuff. It's a very militarized approach to ensuring control of the civilian population.
Perfect. So any comments, or maybe we can do a little coordinating with you of when your next protests are and all the stuff you guys are doing that we can like over that. My words aren't coming.
If I could answer or make one more comment before we get to when the next protest is. Here in Honolulu, we had a very interesting thing that happened when we have a mayor's race that's going on right now. And there was a forum on TV with, I think, 8 out of the 10 candidates that are running for mayor. And so the organizing group asked for questions to be submitted to the candidates. And our Cancel Rimpac Coalition sent in a question: what is your opinion of having Rimpac continue during this time? And it was very interesting. 8 out of 8 of them said the Rimpac should be canceled. So here we have eight people running for mayor that are saying publicly, cancel this. So I guess my point is, it's an election time here in the U.S. I don't know about Canada, but going to public forum to try to get your elected officials to make a comment on these things, and if they're not elected yet, really put some pressure on them that this is one of the issues that you want your answer or you're not going to vote for them. Thank you.
In addition to that, the Honolulu City Council is also up for election this year, and the question was also put to them. And in addition to the mayoral race, every single city council candidate also said they support canceling Rimpac. And so one of the things that's really significant about this is none of these people are going to be elected in time to do anything about this. So they're not. There's no policy position or no policy reason for them to come out against it, unless there's a lot of public support against public opposition to the Rimpac exercises, and there's enough public support that would win them points. And so that kind of shows the state of where we are right now in terms of people being fed up with this extreme militarism here in Hawaii and other places around the world. And that also kind of leads into all these other tactics that we can use. I mean, elected officials are one way, especially during election years. They're very timid about not receiving people's support, and so that's a very effective method. Also, some of the direct action that's being planned is also extremely helpful in terms of exercising a lot of this pressure. Hawaii has seen a lot of that in the past year, and how quickly, especially in America currently, you are seeing how direct action and protests can bend elected officials to the will of the public.
Perfect. Nice. So I'd like to invite someone from Halifax to talk about the Irving Shipyard, if anyone's got an update.
Catherine or Sandy or Tony or Alan, do any of you have a little update about the Canadian Navy on the East Coast? Anything about the Irving shipyard there in Halifax?
We could talk about what we did when we went down to the harbor for the last Nato. What was it called? Sandy, it was during the hurricane. But I did put in chat that we can give you an update on the ICANN city appeal, which will be in front of council. There's a motion coming in front of council regarding the international treaty to ban nuclear weapons. So we are moving forward for the 75th anniversary of Hiroshima to have, hopefully, have Halifax be part of the ICANN city appeal, as Toronto is. And that's one step we've taken here. Hopefully the mayor will wear his white poppy again. And, but since I do have my mic open, I think we need to interrogate the links in in our peace movement and in our war movement around those issues of racism and race, and look at our own spaces and see where we can address in our communities, because this is an extension. NATO is an extension of that kind of violence that we're seeing in terms of, so I just wanted to put that out there too. Thank you. Maybe Sandy has something to add.
Can I also mention, or just add to what Catherine said, that there are Canadian ports that welcome, quote unquote, US nuclear powered warships. And Canadians have been concerned about this for a very long time. About a year and a half ago, I filed an access to information to try to get information about that, and also what the response would be by the Canadian government if there were to be an explosion like that happened on in the Halifax harbor. A naval vessel exploded in 1919, or is it 1917? 1919, I forgot the date, I can't believe it. Anyhow, so we have very dangerous US nuclear powered warships that come to our ports, and Canadians don't have adequate information, and we don't have an adequate response to them, and we shouldn't be accepting them. And I'm hoping that that issue is also mentioned to the Halifax City Council with the whole ICANN campaign, the campaign to abolish nuclear weapons. Thanks.
It was part of our discussion. In fact, having a small nuclear reactor in the harbor may not be something citizens are really keen about. And if there is some kind of a radiation spill, there are showers apparently somewhere where that one can shower after the exposure, but where does that water go? So I mean, it's a much bigger issue, but that was in the discussion. Thank you for mentioning it.
Thank you. I want to bring in Hannah's question here that I liked, that maybe Tamara or Greer, in your research that you've done, that you can maybe touch on this. If there's any comments that have been made from political parties in Canada re Rimpac.
Are there other people that would like to reply to that? I've had the floor for a lot. Greer or Ann or Tony, Alan?
No one's found anything in their research. Oh, no. No.
I think Tony has a quick comment to make. And then, yeah, we have about 5 more minutes and then we should wrap up. We're going to wrap up on the hour.
Yeah. Thank you.
Tony, you're unmuted.
In terms of political parties in Canada, the most important thing is that all the parties in the federal government participate in a cartel and are unified on all the major questions of war and aggression. Tamara has given the example of the very extensive and well documented in terms of the shipbuilding. the provincial government in Nova Scotia, which was a social democratic government, that is the New Democratic Party, when they came into power in 2009, immediately handed out $30 million to the Irving Empire, Irving Shipbuilding, in the name of creating jobs at the shipyards. The only party which thus far has spoken out against Rimpac is the Marxist-Leninist Party, or Communist Party of Canada, Marxist-Leninists. That's not to say that many political people from other parties are not concerned. We know that they are. So the issue of the day for us, and as well as Voice of Women, is to build unity in action, not only to get Canada out of NATO and NORAD, but to establish an anti-war government in our country.
Tony, thanks. Thanks very much for that intervention, and thank you for all the work that you and Alan do with No Harbor for War.
Thank you. I just want to add another point on the shipbuilding. In terms of the different components, they've just announced that the naval ship, what they call the naval support vessel, the cost of this has increased from 1.5 billion to 4 billion. The significance of this ship is not what they call naval support in the sense of it carries cargo and supplies to ships exercising far away from the coast of Canada. This ship is being designed as a what they call a command and control center. So it can act as a control center for amphibious landings. And this shows that not only the massive waste of resources, which Tamara has documented, but the aim to which they're being put. That is, an even more aggressive policy is conceived for the armed forces by the political and economic rulers of our country. That is to participate in foreign war directly from sea to shore, amphibious landings, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, thank you for that, Tony. And maybe in the email that we send to all of the participants, we could include a couple of your articles, because you've written extensively about NATO and the Irving shipyard. And you're absolutely right that all of the major political parties, the Conservatives, the Liberals, the NDP, and the Greens supported the National Shipbuilding Procurement Strategy. They supported the building of the new warships for Canada's Navy, and we really need to get to the message to them that we cannot build these new warships. We need to deal with the real human security crises that we're facing, particularly catastrophic climate change. Yeah, so I think we have one quick comment from Dorothy, and then I think Vanessa and Melissa will have to wrap up.
Yeah.
Dorothy?
I'm just trying to unmute Dorothy right now, but I'm having trouble.
Want me to?
Melissa, can you unmute?
We unmute first, I think, and then she has to unmute herself after we.
I tried to unmute. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes,
okay,
we can hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, so what I wanted to do was come back to the issue of the nuclear-powered ships in the harbors in Halifax, but everywhere they go, and particularly in the Hawaii area. When you saw that lineup of all those ships, how many of those are nuclear-powered? They are releasing. It's not just accidents. It's not just an explosion of those ships. It's the root. It's like with the tritium in the drinking water. It's routine emissions from those ships if they are nuclear ships. It's routine radioactive material, radionuclides into the water. How much of that is drinking water? How much is affecting the fish? We know that since the Fukushima accident, they're dumping radioactive materials into the Pacific Ocean, and it's going right across to all the, all the countries in its way. So we can't forget the whole nuclear fuel chain and its relationship to militarism, and certainly with the depleted uranium, which was in all of the missiles, the cruise missiles, all the bombing that the Americans do is with depleted uranium in those tanks and missiles and planes. So this is stuff we've been doing on the nuclear issues related to nuclear war, and we really need to bring them into this discussion with what's going on with Hawaii and anything that has to do with water and oceans and air and bombing and wars. Some of us have been around for 50, 60 years, so we've got a lot of background and history. And I mentioned in my, I don't know if it went through, but Rosalie Bertel has written extensively about the nuclear weapons that are stored in Hawaii. I didn't hear anything about that, but I wrote about it, but I don't know if it went through. But there are many nuclear weapons that are stored in Hawaii. And so there's a whole kind of relationship to all of those issues too, probably related very much to where the bases are, but I'm not sure of the various locations. I just wanted to raise that because we need to bring that whole nuclear issue between the depleted uranium, the releases from the ships, the weapons storage. This Rosalie Bertel has written books with a lot of this in it, so go back and look at her books because there's wonderful research and people have worked on these issues who are and Voice of Women, of course, have been on top of this since I came into it. When my children were born. So Pam is now in her 50s, so it's 50 years that I've been doing this stuff. From Voice of Women, Ursula Franklin, Muriel Duckworth, Rosalie Bertel. Those were all the people who taught us all this stuff. And they have been a major influence in a lot of talk about feminism, talk about the militarism and the men. That whole issue that somebody raised was really important about the male macho climate of war and policing and so on. Anyway, I just wanted to get those thoughts in, and thanks very much for organizing this and everybody's comments. And we have a lot of work to do, but there's a lot of good people doing good work now and making the connections. I mean, these racist, anti-racist demonstrations are making a lot of links. So I think we plug into all of that. Thanks.
Thank you, Dorothy. It's always good to see and hear from you. So I'm going to welcome, unfortunately because of time, we'll put all the links and events that everyone's doing in the follow-up. So I'm going to give Vanessa 2 seconds, and then I'm going to do my little closing blurb, and then we should be done by maybe 1 after. So Vanessa.
Yes, thank you, Melissa, and thank you so much to all of our panelists and everybody for tuning in and for being present here at the debut of our Cancel Rimpac VOW-sponsored call to action. So I'm really excited about that, and thank you, Dorothy, for bringing in the issue of nuclear weapons. That was our founding issue 60 years ago, and we are celebrating our 60th year of being established this year, and we are still fighting, but we are not losing hope that we will be finishing it. And part of our multi-pronged approach for the campaigning is that we are trying to get a member of parliament to sponsor our petition, and then all we need couple hundred signatures, and then we are forcing a debate in parliament. So we didn't have enough time for Rimpac, but we'll be doing it with our other anti-weapons procurement campaigns, such as with the fighter jets and with the warships. So please keep your eyes and ears peeled for that, and we need all the help that we can get in sharing and getting those letters sent to our parliamentarians on the Cancel Rimpac. So thank you, everyone. And yes, I'll hand it back to you, Melissa.
Thank you. So I just have quick words, and then as soon as I'm finished, I will close the meeting. So thank you for joining us. We come together to talk about these tragic events, to remember that we are safe here, can make more actions here, can influence more here. We have privilege in our homes and computers. We have space to grow and feed ourselves. We remember the ones affected by war and climate change that don't have these privileges. We work today and always to make everyone have equal privileges and meet the needs for everyone to survive happily. Please take these words with you now as we go into our worlds. We will follow up with all the resources and a link to the YouTube video, and I hope to see all of your faces back next month for our next No to NATO, Yes to Peace webinar. And don't forget to sign the petitions and send your letters. Thank you. Enjoy your day. Think of each other. Be empathetic and safe. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.